today I know we're going to be talking about spiritual direction or spiritual guides and spiritual guidance, and I'm intrigued by remembrance. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you first became involved as being a spiritual guide or part of your history and your personal story?
I was always interested in spirituality, religion, mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
and I began to get deeply involved, committed to meditation in the kind of Kundalini yoga Indian tradition back quite a few years ago, about 1964, 65. And for about 12 years I practiced that form of spiritual practice, meditating for about a half an hour to an hour every day, morning and night, with longer meditations once a week. And I also had a wonderful Zen master and meditated in the Zen tradition as well. Then in 1981, as a guest to my school, I met my Sufi teacher. My school, the Institute, is really founded on the notion of holistic education, which includes body, mind, spirit, creative expression, service. And we've brought over the years, almost every year, spiritual teachers from different traditions. And this was the first time we brought a Sufi teacher back in 1980. Actually, 1980 came twice, 80 and 81. And I had no idea who he was. He was invited by one of my faculty members. And it's a fascinating little story. Basically, I was sitting in my office as president of this young institution, busy on the phone doing administrative stuff, which took a lot of my time and energy. And my door was like 3/4 closed. It was like, I'm kind of busy, but I'm not in conference with anyone, and if anybody really needed me, I was available. And I saw through this crack in the door, someone walk by the door. And he didn't stop. He just glanced in the room and walked on. I'd never seen this man before. A heavy-set man with a cap on, which is one of our piece of ceremonial clothing. And in that second, time stopped for me. And I had the sense that my whole life was read in that timeless moment. And the image that came to my mind was it's as though everything was fed in through a really high-speed modem into a great computer. And everything was integrated, and that somehow he knew how it was all going to come out, from the phone call to the rest of my life. So that really got my attention. And I said to myself, you know, I don't normally kind of have inner dialogues like this. It's not always a good sign in psychology to talk to yourself. And and I said, wow, was that the teacher that's been invited? Because he came with a whole group of dervishes, Sufis. And I said to myself, if that's one of this man's students, I don't want to meet this guy's teacher.
Sure.
Because this was really very strong. And so I went out to see our guests, this small group of Sufis that came. Small group was about 20. And sure enough, that was the head teacher. And that was how I met him.
Wow. So let me ask you this, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you understand spiritual guidance. But did you go up and talk to him straight away? Something drew you to him. I mean, it was as if your heart was read and you knew. But how did you approach him or talk to him about what you experienced in his presence?
I never did.
Really?
Well, I might have years later. I actually don't remember saying that. But I came out and there were a whole group standing around, and I introduced myself as, in a sense, their host, as the head of the institution that was hosting them. And someone then introduced me to him as the head teacher. Now, this was all done, by the way, in translation, because he didn't speak English. And I didn't, at that point, have a word of Turkish. So it was all very indirect. What happened next was I went back to my office and was busy doing administrative stuff for the next few hours. And then one of the Sufis came, knocked on my door, and said, we're having tea now, and our teacher would like you to join us. And I like spending time with spiritual teachers, but this time I got invited to spend time, which was really rather nice. And so I found myself at the kind of main table, sitting directly in front of the sheikh, the teacher, and his translator was on one side of me. And he started telling stories. And my experience of his telling stories was nobody else was in the room. It was just him and me, and the translator's voice was in the background. Everything else faded away. And those stories were so incredibly powerful. He told 2 stories, and the first one, it was about faith. It was about faith and believing that what God is going to bring to you will come to you, no matter what, no matter how it comes. And the next day I said to him, you know, if I really remembered those stories, my life would be different. You know, knowing that what is meant to come to me will come to me. And he looked at me with one of those amazing teacher looks, you know.
I know that look, yeah.
straight through me. And he said, you'll never forget those stories, which is true. I have never forgotten a word of those stories.
Wow, that's a fabulous story. And obviously one that transformed you too, that's brought you deep transformation.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Can you describe what spiritual guidance looks like in your tradition?
Spiritual guidance for us is really very different from the kind of spiritual guidance that I teach and that SDI represents, because it's much more the role of a spiritual teacher who is representing a tradition, is much more, in a sense, actively holding the life of a disciple rather than guiding a client or a guidee. It's much more like the relationship of like a Zen master to a Zen student or a guru to a disciple in yoga. I mean, technically we are a Sufi order very similar to the orders in the Catholic tradition, like the Franciscans or the Jesuits. And we don't formally take vows of obedience, but in a sense it's implicit in what we do, so that the people that I see have taken virtually a vow of obedience to follow my guidance, which is not that they really do, because we don't. But the relationship is a very profound one.
Certainly.
And in fact, traditionally, you wouldn't even go out of town without asking for your sheikh, your teacher's blessing and permission. And my people still do, not all of them, not all the time, but they do say, I need to go out to see family or on a conference. May I have your blessing? So it's somewhat different than the relationship of a regular spiritual guide to someone who comes and sees them once a month.
So for a young seeker, what would you tell them about finding a guide?
So I think that's the first and most important thing, is to follow the heart, to go where the heart leads one. We also work with dreams. And in our tradition, it's not uncommon to ask for a dream before going to bed, to really ask God for a dream to answer an important question. And one of the most important questions we ever ask is, should I follow a teacher? Should I follow a spiritual guide? And again, the dreams don't come from the head. So there's a funny way in which we might trust them. In fact, ideally, even if a student falls in love with a teacher, in our tradition, the student would ask for a dream and the teacher would ask for a dream confirming whether this person is ripe.
So there's a mutuality of discernment there.
Yes.
That's important. Thank you. That will gift me through my day. Would you like to do a blessing to kind of wrap or close our time? I'm aware that we're close to being finished.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the source of all grace, bless all of us who are guides. Bless all of us who are seekers. Bless us that we may continue to seek truth, that we may find a guide and a path to lead us to truth. Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. Bi hurmati Sayyid al-Mursaleen.